The title of this project, Wack versus Woke, spotlights how cultural experiences of minority students can either be highlighted or treaded upon within educational settings, and essentially helps educators to address race within the classroom. This video discusses both individual opportunities for growth as educators, as well as opportunities for policy changes on the macro level. A companion handout has also been created that provides numerous more examples and expanded explanations beyond what will be found within the video itself. The talking points were derived from trailblazers in the world of culturally sustaining pedagogies, such as Boutte, Alim, Paris, Ladson-Billings, and more. Additionally, the concept of looking at culture more holistically with a focus on equity was heavily influenced by Gorski and Gutierrez. It should be noted that some Wack approaches can be adjusted immediately, while others will require thoughtful planning, research, and an evolutionary or revolutionary mindset to take root. However, each opportunity for change has the potential to make lasting, positive impacts on all students, but especially those of racially diverse backgrounds. Prior to diving into the material, I welcome all viewers to reflect on the symbol presented on the screen. Before you is an Adinkra symbol, a symbolic language that originated in West Africa during the early 1800s, meaning knowledge. More specifically, it translates to, "He who does not know can know from learning," a beautiful principle to consider while approaching this critical topic. Before getting into the specifics, let us also address a few considerations. First, education in school becomes foundational to life experiences, so it is important to ask yourself, what kind of foundation am I building for my students? Second, the topics being addressed could be emotionally charged, so it's important to first provide students the tools necessary to engage in difficult conversations. Also, trust of the teacher is always vital, but especially when addressing topics of race. It's also important to note that effort goes a long way. As stated in an interview with collegiate alumni Clifton Jett Jr., it is generally more appreciated to watch a teacher have missteps while trying to talk about issues if they are being authentic and sincere than to watch a teacher deliver a carefully constructed lecture without feeling. Lastly, and most critically, educators must accept that life for racially diverse students is fundamentally different. Educational experiences not excluded. Acceptance of reality is the first step towards actionable change.
I've been in situations where, I had to cross the street because I didn't want to scare the white lady that was walking.
It would get to the point where I would start to count how many times a woman would clutch her bag.
When I was 16, I was leaving my mom's house in my pajamas, which had snowmen on them, with my brother, and we were actually stopped by the police rather aggressively. I've been stopped by the cops on my way between classes because we have two separate buildings, walking from one building to the other building, as my white students in the same class walked by me.
As we move through the video, we'll first talk about Wack approaches, followed by woke approaches. For all intents and purposes, we were talking about things that are essentially missing the mark or downright defeating the purpose of addressing racial diversity in the classroom and the associated woke responses that should be actively pursued. For example, creating a classroom environment that sets a tone of discomfort by not being mindful of how pictures, symbols, and sayings posted around the room may be perceived by students from racially diverse backgrounds. Instead, disarm the space by removing those symbols and instead provide more examples of positivity, hope, and imagery of racially diverse leaders, innovators, and trailblazers.
In Florida, it's very rare to see like a Black teacher, a Black doctor, a Black lawyer. So I struggled trying to see myself and like educated people.
It is Wack to seek public points of wokeness or allyship. Instead, seek opportunities for authentic and sincere one-on-one interactions beyond the limelight, and just be there for your students. Also, please avoid saying, "I don't see color" when addressing the topics of race. Racial identity is a point of pride for many individuals, and additionally, denying race creates a blindness to the issues that continue to need to be addressed.
I really, there's a saying that goes, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. You know what I mean? So it's like, there's some people who will kind of really espouse what they know and how much they know, and they want to show you that they have. But just a slight gesture or conversation that you have where you're just like, you know what, this person checked in on me.
It is also whack to not be aware of your language. With body language, if you were to look overly impressed, for example, when a minority comes across as professional or articulate, what kind of message does that send? Also, using culturally demeaning language or language that disguises oppression or racism. You need to recognize that many of the words used in American vocabulary are rooted in dog whistle politics and are actually aimed at creating division amongst races. The nice thing is that both in our oral and our body language, these are vocabularies that can be adjusted and amended.
Think about a term like illegal alien,
makers and takers,
welfare queen,
entitlements,
freeloaders,
people who just want free stuff,
inner city crime,
drug testing for welfare recipients.
What color faces do you associate with those terms? Or think about terms like the silent majority, the heartland, real Americans, hardworking taxpayers. What color faces do you see with those terms?
When addressing race in school, know that an absence in effort regarding researching topics surrounding race, solely focusing on history defined by the curriculum while overlooking the impacts of current events, and singling out racially diverse students in an effort to have them represent and educate the whole class as a token of their race are all whack. Make sure that you approach topics well-informed with a willingness to accept that modern issues are played in every classroom, and remembering that an approximation of skin tone does not equate to homogeneity of internal value systems. It is also important to remember that racial issues are not relegated to the race itself, so full class discussions as opposed to the singling out of a handful of students is always the preferred approach.
You know, we may not overtly show it, but, you know, we have shrinking moments internally where it's just like, knew this was coming, just waiting for the moment for them to say, anybody have any feedback on this? And the whole class gets quiet and you almost feel compelled to, you know, have to make a point about it.
Perhaps one of the biggest pitfalls to avoid is believing that the mere act of talking about race will cause division. The truth is, division already exists, and the only way to address the division is being willing to leave a zone of comfortable neutrality within the classroom and be willing to spotlight and discuss those ever-present imbalances. While doing so, educators should remember that cultural capital that students have within their communities and utilize those connections while doing so. One common whack response in this process is teachers feeling uncomfortable with taking a stance on a topic and thus turn the topic over for debate amongst the students. The flaw here is that race and racial issues are not debatable. One of the best tips for navigating these waters is to focus conversations towards equity as opposed to attempting to become an expert in cultural awareness.
They would start teaching about the race or start teaching about the history, and then it becomes a debate in the classroom, which is why a lot of students don't want to speak about it, because it seems like the teacher is allowing the subject to be debatable, and it's not a debatable subject. It is facts, it is statistics, and whatever. I think discussing diversity and inclusion is as a whole is beneficial, because you're just not only targeting the students who are Black. You are also speaking of students who may make up diversity as a whole, which gives other students the opportunity to relate. We're not only just talking about color and those who aren't of color can't relate, but we're also talking about different ways that students as a whole can relate to each other.
Not only are whack approaches present on the micro level, but they also exist at a systems and policy level. Classroom policies to avoid include approaching curriculum with a one-size-fits-all approach, as that approach is generally tailored to the white majority through the delivery and evaluation of Eurocentric history, culture, and language. In an effort to be more woke, administration needs to allow space for exploration and how the curriculum can be met while being more cognizant of the absence of racially and ethnically diverse voices. One way of doing so is specifically offering more opportunities for ethnically diverse courses of study, perhaps even considering adding such classes to the core curriculum. A further whack response that has been ever present during the turmoil of 2020 is educational entities trying to quickly appease communities of color that are being affected by traumatic instances of racial unrest, such as the death of Breonna Taylor, in an attempt to return to quote unquote normalcy. Instead of letting the moment pass and helping it do so in an expedient way, schools should provide opportunities for exploring feelings and having open and honest dialogues surrounding the unrest. The researchers and educators identified in brief at the beginning of this video are pioneers in educational movement in the creation and implementation of cultural sustaining pedagogies. This pedagogical approach, as Boutte writes, calls for schooling to be a site for sustaining the cultural ways of being of communities of color, while Buckholtz, Casillas, and Lee remind us that culture itself sustains and should thus be focused on as a strength and something worthy of preservation. With that in mind, educators and educational systems need to avoid the Wack approaches of relegating racial awareness to a few specific days or even a month, such as Black History Month. They should avoid insulating topics of race and culture to the classroom and judging performance through the strict gaze of standardized tests. The woke response then is to inject racial and cultural diversity throughout all of the curriculum. Help students build on those lessons within their own communities to provide counter narratives and find ways to evaluate students beyond the confines of a test. For example, by assessing areas of growth in reasoning, problem solving, leadership, and adaptability. Perhaps most importantly, schools should avoid the Wack approach of assuming that an inability to meet certain academic thresholds is a result of deficit, but rather should re-examine performance through cultural lenses and be willing to accept a responsible role in the outcomes. For more information on this topic, please refer to the companion handout that looks at each of these areas of change more in depth with expanded examples and research. Additionally, consider exploring respectability.org, a nonprofit organization that offers a consortium of articles and resources surrounding the fight against racism and unconscious bias, as well as the Race and Equity Initiative led by the University of Washington. Regarding arming oneself with the tools to carry out difficult conversations, the University of Michigan Center for Research on Learning and Teaching offers a guide applicable to teachers and students alike. The conversations can be hard, but the most important thing is that they continue to happen. Students' lives depend on it.